My name is Lita. I still remember that night in Bend, sitting around a long oak table, the air thick with the remnants of champagne and the afterglow of my brother Ethan's wedding. My mother, with her sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through steel, raised her glass and declared, "Your brother's wedding was perfect." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. Around me, the others laughed and replayed the details of the reception. Ethan had twirled his bride, Sarah, with such grace during the first dance, and the toast had brought tears to everyone's eyes. I forced a smile and passed the bread basket, the dutiful daughter who never asked for more. My cousin, Jake, leaned across the table and grinned. "So, Lita, when will it be your turn? Or are you planning to surprise us?" The table erupted in laughter, and even my father, a man of few words, allowed a thin smile. I looked down at my hands, twisting the napkin between my fingers. My ring glinted briefly under the chandelier, a silent reminder of the secret I had been keeping. I curled my hand into my lap, hiding the light. My mother pressed on, her voice a mixture of teasing and warning. "Don't wait too long, dear. You're not getting any younger." The laughter swelled again, and I lifted my glass and sipped the wine slowly, letting the burn steady me. But beneath my smile, a truth waited, patient as a fuse. They had no idea that the story had already changed, that I had already taken control of my own life. As the table settled back into chatter, I took a deep breath and prepared to speak. The laughter around me grew louder, a chorus of voices urging me to break my silence. Ethan's best man, Ryan, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "Careful, Lita. If you wait too long, you'll be what they call it. Used material." The table erupted in snickers, and my mother shook her head, but she didn't correct him. I kept my glass steady, swirling the wine until it caught the light. Heat crawled up my neck, but I refused to let it show. I had learned long ago that my silence was their favorite weapon, so I smiled and said, "It already happened. You just weren't there." The room fell silent. Forks hovered in mid-air, and glasses froze halfway to lips. My cousin's grin faltered, and confusion slipped into his eyes. My mother blinked once, then again, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. I set my glass down and said, "I'm married." The room tightened, and Ethan's wife shifted uneasily in her seat. My father cleared his throat but said nothing. My mother's voice was sharp now, stripped of all pretense. "When?" "6 months ago," I replied. "At the courthouse." Simple, no drama. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Ethan's gaze darted from me to our parents, his expression a mix of disbelief and irritation. I leaned back, folding my napkin across my lap, the picture of composure. They had always mistaken my silence for weakness, but tonight they would learn that it had only been restraint. As the weight of my words settled into the room, their questions began to rise, sharp and frantic, demanding an explanation I had no intention of giving. But in my mind, another night unfolded, a quiet evening in Portland when I first realized that I had been written out of the family story. It was late spring, and the city was finally warming up after months of rain. Every day, I checked the mailbox outside my apartment, half expecting to find a heavy envelope with embossed letters. Ethan's wedding was all my mother could talk about on our sporadic calls, and I couldn't believe that she would forget me. But the mailbox stayed empty. Bills, flyers, nothing else. When I finally asked, my mother's voice was light and dismissive. "We assumed you'd be busy with work. Those school schedules of yours are impossible." Ethan followed with his own excuse. "We thought it might be complicated, you bringing someone." Each excuse landed like a polished stone, smooth and practiced, impossible to grip. On the morning of the wedding, I stayed in bed longer than usual, my body heavy with a feeling I didn't want to name. By afternoon, my phone was vibrating non-stop. Photos flooded my feeds, Ethan and Sarah framed by the river, her gown catching the golden light. My parents beamed like they had been handed crowns, and there was a group shot, my cousins, aunts, and uncles all dressed in coordinated shades of cream and sage. The caption read, "Family Forever." I stared at the screen until the edges blurred. I didn't cry, not then. I scrolled, my face hot and my heart pounding, waiting for proof that it was a mistake, that my name had somehow slipped from the list by accident. But the proof never came. Instead, there was silence. No call to explain, no apology, just the neatness of a story told without me. That night, I closed my phone and sat by the window, watching the city lights glow in rows. It struck me then that being left out wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing that I had never been counted in. Months later, when I stood at the table in Bend and told them I was married, the truth was already carved deep in the silence of that missing envelope. 6 months before Ethan's celebration, I had stood inside the Multnomah County Courthouse, hand in hand with my husband, Leo. The marble floors echoed faintly under our steps, and our reflections stretched in the tall glass doors. A clerk double-checked our paperwork, and the judge asked if we were ready. That was all it took. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, a vow spoken with steady voices. No rehearsed speeches, no assigned seating, no one taking pictures on our behalf. Afterward, we walked out into the gray Portland afternoon, the city busy with its own errands. Leo carried a small bouquet of calla lilies wrapped in butcher paper, the flowers I loved most. We crossed the street toward Tom McCall Waterfront Park, where the river cut a silver line between bridges. The breeze lifted my veil, a simple one borrowed from a friend, and I laughed as Leo caught it before it flew. We stopped on a rise overlooking the water, the steel arches of the Hawthorne Bridge behind us. There, without ceremony, we read the words we had written on scraps of paper, promises shaped by honesty, not performance. My hands shook, but not from fear. They shook because I had finally stepped into something entirely my own. Leo slid the ring onto my finger, a thin band of gold we had chosen together at a shop off Hawthorne Boulevard. No one clapped. No one cried. Only the river bore witness. And that was enough. Later that evening, Leo dug into the soil near our small rental by Mount Tabor and planted lily bulbs, saying, "Now your name grows here." I mailed a photo to my parents the next day, me mid-spin, hair flying, Leo's arm around my waist. I was laughing in a way they hadn't seen in years. I waited for a call, a note, any acknowledgement that they had received it. None came. The silence was louder than rejection. It told me that they had decided my joy wasn't part of the story they wanted to tell. And by the time Ethan's wedding unfolded, I already knew how little space I held in the family album. The silence that followed my wedding photo wasn't new. It was only the most recent echo in a long corridor of omissions. Growing up, Ethan's trophies had lined the mantel above the fireplace, gleaming cups from baseball tournaments, plaques from debate, even a ribbon from a science fair where he had only placed second. My drawings, framed in cheap glass, had spent years stacked in the hall closet. When neighbors visited, my mother always ushered them toward Ethan's collection, her voice bright with pride. If someone asked about me, she would say lightly, "Lita, our quiet one. She's helpful." Every December, she would write her holiday letters on heavy cream paper, recounting Ethan's promotions, his college internships, his engagement. When it came to me, she would tuck in a single line, always vague. "Lita keeps busy with her projects." Never a mention of the mural I had painted at the community center or the grant I had won to fund art programs at the middle school. My name filled space like punctuation, necessary but hardly noticed. At first, I thought invisibility was safety. If I didn't demand too much, I couldn't disappoint them. If I stayed reliable, I would be left in peace. But invisibility calcifies. It becomes its own cage, locking you out of the narrative until you start to wonder if you were ever really part of it. By the time Ethan's wedding arrived, I recognized the pattern. I wasn't simply forgotten. I was edited out. Not maliciously, perhaps, but strategically, an eraser disguised as harmony. My mother preferred the clean lines of a story that matched her expectations, a son who succeeded, a daughter who didn't complicate things. And yet each time she pressed delete, I felt it. When she left my achievements out of those letters. When she introduced Sarah with tears in her eyes, but brushed past Leo as though he were temporary. When she scrolled through my photo at the courthouse and chose silence over acknowledgement, those cuts bled together, slow and steady, until the night in Bend, when I finally let the truth slip free. The fuse wasn't lit by one cruel joke or a single taunt. It had been burning for years. Every omission another spark carried forward. So when I told them I was married, it wasn't a bomb. It was a boundary. And for once, I wasn't going to retreat after dropping it. 2 days later, my father asked to meet me at Fuller's coffee shop. I almost deleted his message, but curiosity got the better of me. When I walked into the coffee shop, he was already there, sitting in a red vinyl booth that smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt espresso. He looked up when I sat down, his eyes softer than I remembered. "I kept the photo," he said without preamble. For a moment, I didn't know what he meant. Then I saw the corner of an envelope peeking from his coat pocket, the courthouse photo I had mailed months ago, the one my mother never acknowledged. He slid it across the table. The edges were worn, creased from being unfolded more than once. "Your mother said it was disrespectful," he continued. But I couldn't throw it away. I stared at the image, at my own laughter caught mid-motion. Leo's arm was steady around me, and my throat tightened. "Why?" I asked. He sipped his coffee, his eyes lowered. "Because it looked real, and because I wanted to keep one thing that was yours." The words sounded fragile, as though they might break if I questioned them too much. Silence hung between us until he finally asked, "Is he good to you?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "Better than being invisible." His lips pressed together, as if the answer was both relief and rebuke. He nodded slowly, but there was no promise in it, no vow that he would stop hiding behind silence, just recognition, late and incomplete. I folded the photo carefully, tucking it back into its envelope. "Keeping it doesn't erase the rest," I told him. He didn't argue. He only looked at me with an expression that hovered somewhere between apology and surrender. 2 days later, the wedding album arrived on my doorstep. It was a gray Portland afternoon, the kind where the rain doesn't fall so much as linger in the air. A thick cream-colored envelope leaned against my apartment door, my family's crest embossed in gold at the corner. No return address, no note. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and slid it open with a knife. Inside was the album, Ethan's wedding preserved in glossy pages and scripted captions. At first, it was predictable. The rehearsal dinner at Sun River, the lakeside ceremony framed by mountains. My mother mid-toast, her eyes wet and her voice trembling. Then I turned a page and froze. The family portrait, everyone arranged in careful rows, smiling as if for a magazine spread. Beneath the photo, each name was neatly printed in calligraphy. And there, between Ethan and my parents, was a dark-haired woman in a dress I recognized. Not mine, but close. A cousin from Vermont who shared my height, my coloring. The caption under her image read, "Lita Parker." My stomach dropped. They hadn't just left me out. They had written me back in using someone else's body. Leo walked in from the living room, drying his hands on a towel. He saw the page over my shoulder and his jaw tightened. "They replaced you," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, softer. "That means they knew you mattered." The words should have comforted me, but they scraped raw. If I mattered, why erase me at all? Why dress up a substitution and call it truth? I closed the album slowly, pressing the pages together as though the images might spill out if I wasn't careful. The envelope still sat on the counter, its gold crest glinting under the kitchen light. I picked up a marker from the drawer, uncapped it, and stared at the blank front of the package. The next morning, I carried it back outside. The word I had written, bold across its face, looked stark against the cream envelope. Return. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology to soften it. Just the truth they had tried to edit out scrolled across their careful packaging. The next morning, I carried it down the block to the blue mailbox on the corner. The metal was cold beneath my fingers as I lifted the handle and let the envelope slide into darkness. The clang it made when it dropped was sharper than I expected, final in a way words never were. By evening, my inbox lit up. My mother's email subject line read, "You blindsided us." Her words were clipped, rehearsed. She accused me of cruelty, insisted Sarah was heartbroken, claimed there had been no need for a scene at dinner. I read the lines twice, searching for even a fragment of curiosity about why I had stayed silent for so long. There was none. 2 hours later, Ethan posted a photo on social media, himself and Sarah at Sun River, glasses raised. The caption read, "Real love shows up." The comments stacked quickly, friends affirming, relatives applauding. I didn't bother to respond. It wasn't written for me anyway. Instead, I opened a notebook and began to plan something of my own. Not another wedding, not a redo, but a gathering that couldn't be edited or staged. I chose the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden in southeast Portland, where wooden bridges cross still ponds and blossoms spill into every corner. A place where presence mattered more than performance. 30 names filled the page. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, people who had shown up without being asked, people who saw me without revisions. Leo leaned over my shoulder, reading the list. "This feels right," he said. And for the first time in months, I felt light enough to believe him. The evening of our gathering, the garden felt alive with more than flowers. Lanterns hung low across the wooden bridge, casting reflections on the pond, and voices mingled with the sound of water slipping over rocks. 30 chairs stood in a loose circle. No head table, no stage. People came carrying pies, jars of lemonade, bouquets clipped from their own yards. Friends from work, a few neighbors, even 2 of my former students. Each face a reminder that belonging wasn't something I had to audition for. Leo squeezed my hand before we began. We stood together at the center of the circle, not to perform, but to speak what had once been kept private. We read our vows again, the same ones we had whispered at the courthouse, this time aloud, steady, unashamed. I heard my voice crack once, not from nerves, but from the weight finally lifting. When I looked around, no one was measuring my worth against Ethan's ceremony. No one was tallying costs or critiquing dresses. They were simply there, eyes open, listening at the edge of the circle, near the stone steps. I caught sight of my father. He hadn't announced he was coming. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt. He stood back, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable, but intent. When our vows ended and the small group broke into gentle applause, he lingered. And when I passed near him, he whispered, "I'm trying to learn how to show up." I didn't answer. Words would have made it smaller than it was. As the night stretched on, we lit candles and set them floating across the pond. Their reflections shimmered together, unarranged, uncorrected, beautiful in their unevenness. The next morning, I found a message from my mother waiting in my inbox. Weeks passed before she reached out. The subject line was bare. "Ready to talk when you are." No apology, no acknowledgement of what had been done. Only a door cracked open on her terms. I replied with mine. If we were to speak, it would be without revisions. No more invented invitations. No more names swapped in captions. My life would not be reshaped to fit her version of family. She didn't answer right away. My father did. A short note, "I hear you. I'll honor it." It was the closest he had ever come to a promise. Meanwhile, Ethan fired off a clipped message about loyalty and embarrassment. His words were sharp but hollow. For once, I let them pass without reply. Silence this time was mine to wield. One evening, Leo and I walked the East Bank Esplanade, the city skyline glowing across the river. Cyclists drifted by, joggers passed in rhythm, and the river carried all of it steadily north. I slipped a hand into my coat pocket and felt the edge of the courthouse photo, folded but intact. I pulled it out and looked at our frozen laughter, the blur of my dress caught mid-turn. For months, it had been proof of love, of defiance, of a life that didn't need their permission. Now it was something else. Not evidence, but a reminder. I tucked it back into my pocket and leaned against the railing, watching the reflection of the bridges shimmer across the water. For the first time in years, the story in front of me was mine alone. No revisions waiting, no audience to please. And as the river moved beneath us, I felt the